That's what compelled me to check out the Portraits of Past, because I realized I had a copy of it, and when you told me that there was a cult following to that record, I felt compelled to put it on the turntable and give it a spin. And I gotta say,
I understand the cult appeal of this record. Actually, if you listen to this and you were like, I wonder if they listen to black metal, I don't think that that would be like an insane jump to make. I don't think that's the case. You know what I mean? It's same as with Honeywell. But one, it's like, it's such a, it was Stephen Miller from Unbroken was in Julia.
okay,
And then he left. And in an odd turn of events, considering how great Unbroken eventually got, Julia got way better without him.
You are now listening to Male Worship Radio.
This laptop I have, it's like from 2018, I think, and it's this one. This might be one of those things where it's like a sign of like Steve Jobs was dead. So the trackpad, there's two ways to click. You can click, or you can just tap and not actually click. With the idea of, I think, being it's easier on your wrists. But that means that at any given moment, if you move your hand slightly wrong, you can
swipe.
Yeah, like you could accidentally stop recording without ever clicking anything because you tapped in the wrong spot.
I think mine
Just
does
insane.
That too. Anyway.
All right, should I introduce this thing?
Yeah.
All right. Now, Worship Radio. Today we're talking about potentially overrated Screamo records. We have been shitting on certain labels and records a lot for whatever reason, more because they're indicative of something. But recently there have been like reissues of the Portraits of Past LP, the Julia LP, and the Groundwork LP, all of which are records that at least one of us has strong opinions on. So we have decided to kind of do a little bit of a deeper dive, revisit these records, and talk about whether they hold up, whether they matter, whether they should be reissued because they're important records versus nostalgia trips of like basically genre copy and paste type stuff. Does that seem fair?
Yeah, or to just see what all the fuss is about. You know,
Yes,
I think that's,
yeah. Let's get down to brass tacks. Let's see what all the fuss is about.
That's what compelled me to check out the Portraits of Past, because I realized I had a copy of it, and when you told me that there was a cult following to that record and that they were fetching kind of high market value on Discogs, I felt compelled to put it on the turntable and give it a spin. And I gotta say, without jumping into it, I can see what all the fuss is about with this record for sure now. And it's interesting because I bought it when it came out, but it took me all these years to kind of, I mean,
30 years.
Yeah, I mean, what year did it come out? It says the release date on the label.
Yeah. Recorded 95,
but it came out in
96.
96?
According to Yield Discogs, it was released in 96.
Okay.
That sounds about right to me.
Newbury Comics didn't get it until, this is like a late batch, until 97. So I picked it up like a year later. And I thought it had just come out, but maybe I'd waited a while. And yeah. In any case, at that time, I was sort of on my way out of hardcore. So I was probably not as partial to it at the time.
Not paying as much attention.
Probably not. But man, I listen to it now, and there's a lot I can say, but I definitely think like it fits the character of one of these so-called Screamo records that could accidentally be, it's something different, sort of like the Honeywell record, because I think you could probably argue that that's like a influential record for Screamo as well. And I mean, a lot of the bands we talk about actually, but with Portraits of Past, they have so much interesting stuff going on with the guitars that remind me of a lot of other things that, when paired with the sort of presentation of the sort of screaming vocal, it feels a hell of a lot different than a lot of their peers, I think. And I think that's what sets it apart. Like, there's a lot of unique musical aspects to the record too that I can see why it's got a following, like just interesting ideas with melody and stuff.
I've never heard it before. Maybe once or twice in the past, I might have started it on YouTube and then just been like, I don't give a fuck.
Yeah.
But actually listening to it, and I think I did like that split 7-inch that they did with Bleed. I never heard anything else. We did see them. I thought they were impressive live, but then again, I was 16 and had terrible taste in music, so I didn't put a lot of stock in that. And they did make cool shirts.
Yeah.
But no, I'd never listened to this. And then, it first popped up because you were talking about selling it, and you were like, actually, this is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to keep it. I actually think it's kind of amazing. And so then I listened to it. I don't quite, okay, I thought it was going to suck. I thought it was going to be the kind of thing of like, yeah, in 1996, I would have thought that this was good. And by now, I'd be like, ugh, this is gross. Especially because I've heard so much of the other stuff that this led to.
Yeah.
And this led to a lot of terrible, terrible bands. But I understand the cult appeal of this record because it's a very like interesting, odd record. And like you mentioned black metal in reference to it, and like Honeywell, it doesn't actually, if you listen to this and you were like, I wonder if they listen to black metal, I don't think that would be like an insane jump to make. I don't think that's the case. You know what I mean? It's same as with Honeywell, but one, it's like it's such a bizarre form of music. You know what I mean? Because you're like the guitars, they do interesting stuff, and then there is hyperactive, frenetic drumming that entire time.
Yeah.
That it reminds me of black metal, except that like it's taking sort of pretty sad stuff. It's kind of almost taking like Polvo type riffs, adding more distortion to them, but not a ton, and then this insanely fast, almost blast beat drumming, kind of constantly. It's a very odd record, and it is engaging, and like it is pretty absorbing, and I think that's the vocals are like skillfully kind of mixed a little bit low so that they feel they're not purely textural, but like I did hear a live recording and I was like, ew, I fucking hate this. So, and it was the vocals. It was 100% the vocals. I was like, this sucks and it's annoying and monotonous, but the way it's mixed into this record,
it's almost like an instrument.
It sits in it. Yeah. I kind of wish it was more like an instrument. I actually wish it was like processed a little bit like a black metal record or like the Honeywell record. You know, like the Honeywell record, those vocals are recorded with distortion, and the black metal records always had like a ton of reverb on the vocals.
Yeah, stuff like that.
I think it'd be cool if it was a little bit more processed. But in general, it's very interesting that they have like a wall of sound, but you can hear everything. Like you can hear every note of the guitar.
Yeah, there's a lot of it that reminds me of Unwound in a weird way. Not that it sounds like they're copying Unwound, but it's like a more hardcore, full on, more encompassing idea of hardcore that includes like, well, reimagining like what guitar melodies should be. And also one of the things that I find really interesting about the record is the guitar tone, especially on certain tracks that have like singular notes. It sounds like it's like brittle and kind of distorted, but not totally distorted. It just sounds like it's almost like a weird lo-fi. It reminds me of the Unwound records of like 93, like New Plastic Ideas, that almost sounds lo-fi, but it's just raw sounding, like a recording production. The production quality of it is sort of just kind of live sounding and simple, like not a lot of built up in the mix. And this has that same kind of like texture to it. And it also has that same kind of mood to it. Like I listened to it, repeatedly this week, kind of obsessed on it. And what I like about it is, I don't know, there's multiple songs, but it kind of feels like it's like a piece of art. Like there's side A and side B. It almost feels like two songs or two ideas. Like it really flows in this really cool way where it feels more like the way a record should feel, which is like kind of like an experience, And that might be also kind of part and parcel to sitting down and listening to it on vinyl, as opposed to not to take anything away from the streaming experience, but I have such an idea of it as being a physical thing with two sides. So I'm like flipping it, and so I'm like, oh, that's what this side has, that guitar melody on it, and the other side has the other thing, and that's how they're memorable. But yeah, good band. I mean, I gotta say too, just real quick, I listened through. They did like an EP in 2010 or something, and I listened to that, and it isn't maybe as good, but pretty damn close to. It's not bad, and I kind of think of them a little differently now as being a little bit of an oddball band in a scene that was sort of full of a lot of like copycat, trend, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think we're thinking outside of the box enough to be something that was not so stock.
I think that what I kind of took away from this record, when I think of this type of stuff, I just think of kind of pretty music with unnecessary screaming over it.
Yeah.
And because that's what a lot of the stuff was. Or I think of actually almost like early Julia, or like the first Hoover 7-inch, like Sidecar Freddy, with like the long, like, just, I don't know what you call it, like just strumming back and forth, like this simple like chord progression that is just like a texture, and it's like it's a certain sound. There's I can't hum it and I can't think of it, but whatever. Just kind of two modes basically. And this record, like, it takes, like, it's interesting because it's like, it's sort of like they decided that the way to make it still a hardcore record was through the drumming. Like, not so much the screaming and not so much the guitars. It was more like, if the drums are fast and there's this like dissonance throughout it, then this thing is still a hardcore record.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know that they conceptualized it that way, but I think when you compare it to a lot of the stuff that was happening around the same time, those bands, it was just like, well, the thing that makes it hardcore is we're hardcore kids. But
right.
Aesthetically, it's just like a shitty version of Slint with a dude shrieking. And even in this band, and similar to Honeywell, even if I find the vocals like a little bit monotonous, because I do find them like, because they do the same, there's something interesting about the fact that they do the same thing every single time, all the time. There's like a weird rigidity to it, but it also kind of speaks to maybe a lack of knowing what else to do. Because when they're not screaming, they only have two modes. Like when they sing, they always sing the same type of rhythms. And when they scream, they always scream the same, basically the same type of rhythms. And it makes like, whatever song where there's like this, like, I think it's a chorus and it's like, don't stop, don't stop. Even that, which is not creative, is different enough that it stands out from the rest of the record. And they're still screaming, but God, it just sounds like I'm dissing this record. It's not what I mean to do. But I feel like what they're doing is coherent to the record.
Yeah.
Like, I don't go like, oh, it's not like something I hate, like Touche Amore, where that dude is just shrieking all the time for no reason when the record like doesn't demand it.
Yeah.
Or like, I think I complained about that new Tim Singer band, Bitter Branches, where they're like writing music that's more like stuff that was on the line of post-hardcore indie rock, like Drive Like Jehu or whatever. But then this dude is just screaming like Tim Singer, and it just is like, what's this dude screaming about? And why is he ruining perfectly good music with the screaming? Like it doesn't feel coherent. And this record feels like so aesthetically coherent. The recording, the tones, that crazy drumming, the full on screaming, and this, like, the bass tone is awesome.
Yeah.
Like there's some times where it's doing some stuff, you know, because the bass tone is like the bass is the most distorted thing on the recording, I think.
Hmm.
And it's doing something, it sounds super cool. I mean, that's one of the things about this record is like it sounds like very cool.
Yeah.
It's got like an aesthetic to it. And one thing I'm disappointed about, because I just noticed this, is the LP song sequences are different than what's on Spotify. Because I
Oh,
think Spotify is the
like a
discography
discography.
CD, and maybe
Yeah.
it's the original intent behind the sequencing.
Yeah.
Um, but I did have this feeling of like these songs are written within a very narrow musical language, very intentionally.
Yeah.
Like you can go, you can pretty much immediately be like, "Yep, this belongs on this record," like 100%. And I like that aspect to it of they don't have like, hey, here's our rager and here's our this and here's our that. It's more like, here's another song where we do sort of the same thing, but with just enough difference that it justifies making another song. If that
Yeah.
makes sense.
It reminds me. It does remind me a little bit, like tonally and theme, just in terms of mood, as like of one of the early like Dark Throne records, like the like like a Blaze in the Northern Sky or something, where it's like it has a whole mood about the whole thing, and it feels like a thing. This is like the hardcore version of that. Or maybe a better comparison would be like the Rorschach Protestant LP, where it feels like almost like cinematic, the way it's like, okay, this is like a whole, it's like a piece. So I do think it's a good thing they reissued it, and I think it was definitely worth reissuing, especially given the following to it. I guess they sold out right away, and as far as I know, it was Ebullition that reissued it, right? Like I think that
Yep.
Ebullition just did a, as far as I could see from like on online, it looks like a direct like reproduction. I think they did like the insert the same exact way, and it's just like,
Yeah, they
uh,
basically like I guess they had lost the original art a long time ago, and so they reconstructed everything. Um,
oh,
it is funny. I kind of Evolution sort of cracks me up because, like, I mean, they stay in business somehow, but they were like afraid to do more than 500 copies. Like, there's no way we're gonna be able to sell 500 of these. And then,
right,
but you look at it like on Spotify, and like every song has got like over 100,000 plays.
right, yeah.
That's like that's better than the Hoover LP,
That is actually really pretty
a
high.
record that had way more distribution and is like widely influential. And there goes our mention of Hoover for this episode. So
Yeah, there
now
we
we
go.
just have to organically bring up Lungfish and Nirvana.
Right.
We
I
have
got
done what
nothing
we're
on
supposed to
Nirvana
do.
this week.
And we have to bring up Frail.
Right. Well, we'll
uh,
apologize for, yeah, I can kind of see the light on Pharrell now in terms of that reunion, at least in terms of like meaning to get back
oh,
together.
I don't want to talk about this now, but I'm making a note because I had this thought about the reunion thing that I wanted to like hit at the end. Yeah, I completely get what the fuss is about with the Portraits of Past LP. I understand why people are after it. I understand why it kind of flips people's lids, and I more understand why a band like Portrayal of Guilt, who sort of go like our influences is like screamo first, black metal second, because it completely makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a pretty interesting record. Like for me, it wouldn't go into like heavy rotation because like aesthetically, it's a little bit too much for me.
I
But
think
I completely get it.
same here. I think it's one of those things I'm momentarily fixated on, and then it's going to go away again just because it's not really my palette of music that I listen to a lot. But as a thing, as you know, that I sort of feel like I objectively reanalyzed, it's like really good. And probably the same for the other two records we're going to talk about too. Like I don't really know what I listen to. My life's so crazy right now that all I really have the bandwidth for is just the radio. So I just have like DJs selecting for me.
I
Unless
go
we're
through like genres, you know what I mean? Where I'll be like, I'm listening to some of this for a week or two, or I'm listening to like these two or three records maybe for a week or two. But that's like mixed in with podcasts and whatever bizarre reaction video obsession I have at any given time
sure.
that might be like Dire Straits or Black Sabbath,
Yeah.
or it might be like apartment scene from Pulp Fiction.
Right.
Yeah.
Unless
Well,
you do.
so the second one that lines up with the other Abolition reissue that they just did was the Julia LP, which came
Yeah.
out in that I want to say is 95. Actually, it might even be 94. Let's just go to Abolition real quick.
It says it came out in 94 on the YouTube link.
All right. So yeah. So Abolition just reissued this Julia record. It was a split label with River's End, which was a label run by Jeremy from Julia. You've never heard this record before, right?
Right.
And did you listen to that any of their 7-inches? So, and their
No.
7-inches were like I first got, well, not Abolition. Bloodlink were probably the first one to give Julia any hype because they did their second 7-inch and distroed their first 7-inch, and it was X Unbroken. Not X, it was Stephen Miller from Unbroken was in Julia. So that helped those first two 7-inches get some attention.
Okay.
And then he left, and in an odd turn of events, considering how great Unbroken eventually got, Julia got way better without him. So, Julia LP, thoughts?
I was surprised by what I heard. I didn't expect it to be as like sort of like robust musically as, you know, it reminded me a lot of Hoover in a lot of ways. But I definitely think it had like a hell of a lot more going on than just that. I was expecting something along the lines of Still Life or something really kind of moody and emo. And while
A
it
lot
doesn't,
more like pretty notes and stuff, pretty
Yeah.
distorted. Essentially, like if you took the Portraits of Past riffs and put them over slow, boring drums.
that's what I thought. And it wasn't. It sounded like a DC kind of more influenced thing, or Drive Like Jehu. I mean, that would probably be an influence, I would think, given the time and geographic location. But yeah,
they
there's a
were from
lot
San
going on.
Diego.
I think I listened to it like twice. So, yeah, those are my general thoughts on it. But I don't know enough about, the band. Like,
Probably weren't around very long, 92 to 94, I might guess. I don't know if they toured with that. I want to say they were broken up by the time that LP was out. But yeah, I love this record so much. In some ways, it's one of those things where I like it in spite of itself at times, because the weak link is the vocals.
yeah,
And this dude I think Jeremy may have sang, but I can't remember. But the interesting thing about the vocals is this is a rare instance where when he screams, it sounds awesome. Like he hits like a pitch.
yeah. He's
Like
in
when
on
when
pitch.
this stuff is like going, especially when it's like in kind of rock mode, like that opening. Oh wait, not the opening track, because the opening track then goes into like a weird slow thing. But when it's like in rock mode and he's screaming, it sounds awesome. Like he's got an
Yeah.
awesome voice. When it's in like slow mid-tempo mode and he starts singing, it's not so bad that I can't listen to it, but you do kind of go, man, I wish this dude had figured out what his range was,
Right.
because he never figured it out. Like he just kind of moans, and on some level, it's like the charm of hardcore that this was acceptable, but on another level, you're like, one or two records more, he might have figured out what he was supposed to be doing.
Right.
But when he screams, it sounds awesome. It's got like a unique tone to it that I super like. And that this is like true of the Portraits of Past record too, which is that there's like this whole like Screamo thing, and it's like a genre. And on some level, there's something about genres that kind of sucks, because then there's like a bunch of boxes you have to check. but it's usually whatever leads to the genre is actually interesting and not checking those boxes. And like
Yeah.
the Julia record, like if you listen to the early stuff, you can kind of tell it's a dude from Unbroken because of like a style of playing. And then it basically sounds like Unbroken meets Hoover with like moaning over it. And then somewhere they flip a switch, and I feel like in the beginning they care about being a band, and they do band stuff, and the big concern is like being a band that does like certain types of things. This is my dickhead judgment. And then all of a sudden they get to a point where they care about writing music, and they care about shit like guitar tone and what they're doing with the guitar. um there's stuff where they try things that I think are outside of their skill set, like, but you can tell that they're reaching for something. Like on some level it's a shame that this is where the band stopped, but
Yeah.
again, like this is what happens with bands that are basically made up of high school kids.
Right.
Because there's stuff that's like not quite sorted out, but you're like, there's an interesting idea here. um
Yeah, that's like you
yeah.
got to. There's some benefit of the doubt you have to give because of the age of the people that made a lot of this stuff, especially in retrospect. And then you have to kind of give credit where credit's due, because when the stuff, like the good things about it, you're like, wow, that's kind of brilliant for like a teenager. I mean,
Mhm.
or it's kind of brilliant in general, but it's like kind of amazing for such young people to come up with stuff. I mean, the average age of the bands we're talking about are all pretty young, like because they're about our age or a few years older, back then. And you know, yeah. I mean, I wasn't coming up with much like music in my teens that was of note. I did play in a hardcore band, but it's not
No, and
worth.
I want to say I talked to Jeremy a little bit back in the day, and I want to say that one of the reasons for Julia breaking up was like he was going off to college.
Yeah,
And like that's like a very classic thing. And then there's the whole maybe do DC thing of every band is around for 2 to 3 years.
yeah,
One or two 7 inches an LP, you're done. That kind of model. But to progress as much as they did for basically a bunch of high school kids who were also doing more than one band. Like you've got Steven is in Unbroken and Gehenna.
oh
Uh,
yeah,
Other people from Julia were in the band Lumber, that was like another kind of like more indie rock sounding band. So they're like doing a lot and going to high school and running a record label. It's kind of a miracle that you can make any progression at all. But I do feel like they unlocked stuff. The funny thing about listening to this recently, like I commented that I think it's the second song. It sounds so much like either Lurid Traversal of Route 7 off the Hoover
yeah.
record. It sounds like one of those two instrumental things. It literally sounds almost like the exact same riff. I might be wrong about that, but I was like, holy fuck, this is a Hoover song.
There's a lot of similarities to Hoover, I heard, but I liked it. I thought it
Yeah,
was good.
yeah.
It was a good take on it.
Yeah, I still think that it's like it's really good. It's got a ton of musical ideas, and I mean, I think I joked in another episode that it's like, you know, now I'll take it back, but it's like it's the one good record on on Abolition because it's not
Now we
technically
know.
fully on Abolition.
Now we know there's two, at least two. But these are like I was thinking that about the Portraits of Past. I'm like, this is hands down the best thing Ebullition ever did, accidentally. Like, and it's not to jump back to Portraits of Past, but they're kind of an odd fit in a weird way for Ebullition in retrospect, because they're kind of much more like aligned with like the Gravity kind of thing, which, to if you were to look at that with back then, those were almost opposed to each other. There was the art aspect of the San Diego stuff, and even though Portraits of Past weren't from San Diego, they were pulling from a lot of the same. But maybe Julia too. I mean, maybe Ebullition around the mid '90s was trying to branch out more. But these are definitely their two best releases.
I think there is something that happened, which is that the influence of early Abolition led to these bands that like to me are much better than Abolition. Like even if the Frail LP had happened and it sounded like later Frail stuff, that would easily have been one of the best records on Abolition. And I
Right.
just saw a comment about this the other day when the Threadbare LP came out. Kent McClard literally reviewed it and said, "I'm so jealous that this is not on Abolition. Like, I wish that this was on
Interesting.
Abolition." And he actually asked them to do an LP on Abolition, and but they were already doing it with Doghouse and Committed. And I think Doghouse actually spent money on the recording, which I can't really see Abolition doing. But if the Threadbare LP had been on Abolition, it it would have been miles away the best record on the label.
Yeah.
Like, even compared to, like, no offense, Portraits of Past, but like Threadbare LP is like one of the greatest hardcore records of all time,
Right.
period. I almost think that if it had been on Abolition, some weird alchemical process would have happened to somehow make it bad.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Some kind of booklet would probably spoil it or something. But or some political
But
kind of.
actually, I was like, the reason I was thinking about this is someone posted that the Watermark 7-inch of Threadbare on Instagram, and that's where that comment was. And that record did have one of those overwrought inserts that's like, this is just 5 individuals trying to communicate, and it's like a wall of text about that, which is par for the
Typical.
course. But again, like, that effect that Abolition had on all sorts of bands that then made them spiritually related to Abolition is pretty wild.
Right.
Yeah,
That's...
and this is like another one. You listen to this record, it doesn't sound like something that would be on Abolition.
Right.
But it was an influence on them.
Yeah, definitely. I was surprised. My copy of Portraits of Past definitely comes with an Abolition insert with some sort of. It doesn't seem political. It's just some Kent McClard rant, but it's pretty short. And I wonder if they included that with the reissue, but maybe not. But yeah,
I bet they did. I wonder if anyone posted. I think I have the page open on Instagram. I wonder. I'm not Instagram on
there has been a
this
lot
thing
of.
is called Discogs. I know that the Julia record doesn't have one of those.
Oh, it doesn't.
I think because it's a split. Well, let's see if I'm like talking on my ass.
Sometimes they're hiding in there.
Can I tell a very funny story about this record?
Sure.
So I got the CD came out before the LP, and the CD was supposed to be. I think the CD was either on Bloodlink or it was a split label release with Bloodlink, and so I got, I don't remember how many copies, probably 10 copies of it from Bloodlink, and then was talking to Jeremy from River's End about getting copies of the LP, and those weren't ready yet. And he's like, "Oh, what if I, whatever? Yeah, we'll link to Discogs or whatever." But he was like, "Oh, can you describe it to me?" And if you look at the LP, it's pretty nice looking. I mean, they didn't have like a huge budget or whatever. It's black and white, and it's got some kind of spot varnish that says Julia, or something like that. So I describe it, and I'm like, "Yeah, it's like this brown paper." And he's like, "What?" And then I was like, "Yeah," and then it's like folded over and stapled, and he's like, "Stapled?" And then the label is stapled in here, or the insert, and he's like, "What?" And he's like, "That doesn't sound at all like what it's supposed to look like." And Scott Vyban had just done his like thing of, he got artwork, didn't want to spend money on it, so he like photocopied it, stapled it all together, and then
for the CD.
Yeah, and then he might have done like a screen print of the band's name, but it's not that font, so it's not that artwork. I've seen a couple different versions of it. I just saw one on I think someone's Instagram with like totally different screen printing or rubber stamping.
Wow.
Jeremy was pissed. He was so bummed out, and it's like there's 1,000 of those, right? If it's on Bloodlink in 1995, and if the other. Man. And who knows, maybe I'll edit this out because like maybe this is like a dickhead conversation. And then the other conversation I had that was similar was I was talking to Justin Pearson, I think trying to get some more Unbroken 7-inches off of 31G. And I said, "Yeah, I just got Swing Kids shirts from Kim." And he's like, "What?" And I was like, "Yeah." And I described them, and they were like, they had the cover art, they were black shirts with the artwork of the 7-inch, and then it said something like, "It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing." So I
Right.
described that to him, and he was pissed.
Really?
It was like never discussed. Um,
And was
and
Razzle like just collecting, making money off them? Probably.
yeah, I mean, I don't know that he ever said, and I don't want to. I probably feel like we should edit this out because I don't really want to like. But I have heard Justin talk about one of the reasons he started 31G was that he felt fucked over by almost every label they worked with. He was pissed off at for doing shirts without their permission and for photocopying the Swing Kids artwork when he told them it would be a pocket sleeve.
Right.
And then he was pissed off at
It was a cheap 7-inch.
Bloodlink for similar behavior and never doing anything that actually resembled some form of royalties, whether it was sending 7-inches or sending money, doing tons of represses of the Struggle Undertow split without telling him.
Right.
Just all of that kind of stuff. And there's probably just a super important factor to that, which is people who aren't in bands shouldn't run record labels.
That's true. Well, they're usually
100% because they don't understand, and I'm guilty of this as well. You don't understand the lines you're crossing when you're not an artist, and especially when you're 16 or 17.
That's true.
You don't have a full grasp on what you're doing, and you don't have a full grasp on the lines that you're crossing.
Sure.
With other people's art. And I am guilty of this as well, because I threw the I Am Heaven artwork in the trash at the post office.
Oh yeah, that's story.
I was just like, this sucks. This is bullshit. I felt like betrayed, maybe.
Yeah.
And I said, fuck this, and I threw it away. Now, if I had been in a band and had dealt with record labels, I probably would have had at least a little bit of a different reaction to that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It might have been a little bit cooler, and I might have talked to them and been like, can we please figure this out? Because I got to spend money on this. But I didn't. I just was like a baby about it. But I shouldn't, it's like 17-year-olds maybe shouldn't run record labels, but unless you're like the teen idols, but also you should be in a band.
I have a feeling a lot of your copy went down with DIY things. I mean, I've heard of other stories with other labels. Like, I think it was fairly common of bands getting ripped off in the DIY kind of scene. And I think a lot of it can be attributed to being young and not being able to see what's really happening. But yeah, I mean, SST famously like didn't pay anybody. Like, that's why everybody hates SST. They still don't pay royalties to like Sonic Youth, or I think they somehow were able to keep all that shit in print and just make money off their bands. So
yeah, I think that's what Albini talked about a lot, was like the idea. Well,
like indie labels can be as slimy as majors, basically.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people's justification for when they jumped over to a major was like, well, if I am going to get screwed, be cool if I could get screwed and still pay my rent.
That's why now I'm going to mention Nirvana, but that's why Nirvana left Sub Pop, like, because Sub Pop was kind of screwing them. They're at that time, Sub Pop was going broke. And even though Nirvana was kind of blowing up on an indie level, it was like, I think they were still in a lot of debt and like laying people off, not able to pay the bands. And then what happened was Nirvana had major label interests, so their success kind of bailed Sub Pop out of basically going out of business. Like they signed to Geffen, and then they were able to license the Sub Pop catalog through Geffen, sell millions of those records, which then flushed Sub Pop with cash to kind of keep going and as a label. So it kind of worked out. But yeah, they were looking to go to a major because they were getting fucked by Sub Pop on some level. And I think they felt that's why Mudhoney left Sub Pop for a major label too, because of the same thing. Like they were just broke and couldn't pay the bands. And they felt like they'd rather preserve the friendship or the relationship rather than be like torch it over business.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, like the Sub Pop guys were basically like music critics, right?
Kind of. Like Sub Pop originally was a fanzine, I think out of Olympia. Like it was just a music fanzine, like with interviews and record reviews and stuff. And then it turned into a label. And so, yeah, I guess on that, he was essentially not a band guy. Jonathan Poneman and Bruce Pavitt. I think Sub Pop Fanzine was started by Bruce Pavitt. We can fact check this, but and Jonathan Poneman was like the business partner that came in that had like the money, I think, to kind of, like usually labels have those kinds of partnerships where there's like the money guy.
Mhm.
So that I think is what got it started. But that's a whole other topic, that whole label, probably for a different podcast. But that isn't ours. But
There is like a good point though, because of their dealings with Nirvana, that led to the starting of Kill Rock Stars.
That's true.
Because Kill Rock Stars wanted to essentially find a place for Unwound
Right.
that they felt wouldn't screw them. And Kill Rock Stars was started by artists. And It's actually interesting because it's like, SST, of course, is like a exception, right? Because SST is Greg Ginn.
Yeah.
But Touch and Go was like an interesting exception to, again, a fanzine guy.
Yeah,
that has treated bands. Almost no one has like had any beef with the label except for can't remember what fucking band, Reversal maybe. I can't remember if they're the ones that like did a bunch of lawsuits, but I shouldn't say that without knowing. But people stay with them for eternity, even compared to say Abolition, which like they had to reconstruct the Portraits of Past and Julia artwork because somehow it's been lost. But then you see like Jeff Mueller from June of 44, his Instagram, and Jeff Mueller was involved in like the original printing of the like Shellac at Action Park LP.
Oh, no kidding, yeah.
Which was printed by Fireproof Press in Chicago, which was a letterpress studio that Mueller worked at. And he prints the reissues when they happen, and he still has all the pieces. He's like hung on to those things. Like, sometimes something breaks because it's
I think even
finite material.
They were doing the CDs. Like I think the Rachel's CDs are all letterpress. I saw a thing. Yeah.
So that's like a label that's like the exception where it's not artist run, but for some reason, like Corey Rusk has a very intense set of ethics that mirrors maybe Discord.
Probably because he's
and
a
Discord, of course,
guy.
being the like premier. Yeah, but the Sub Pop guys were fanzine guys, right?
Sort of, but maybe they were more business oriented than, because they had a whole mock sort of corporate like image to them too. Like as soon as it became a label, it became like it was sort of like parallel sentiments to like World Industries of like fake world domination and doing shit like paying music journalists from England to come to Seattle to see like Tad and Mudhoney and Nirvana and stuff. So they were definitely more calculating, I think, and growing it as a business. And it almost really fell apart. And I didn't know that until kind of recently. But did you see that Discord reissued the 10 East Lungfish 7-inch?
Yes, we mentioned it. We've hit the big three: Hoover, Nirvana, Lungfish. Yeah, but we're not going to talk about it today.
No, we won't.
We'll devote 7 hours to it later.
Yeah, that's a good one.
So the Groundwork LP, this came out also, I think, 1994 on Bloodlink. This is, speaking of Bloodlink and stuff, so Bloodlink got the vinyl, and then I don't know if Groundwork needed tour copies, but he just made photocopies of the artwork and then glued it to LP sleeves. I believe he found a bunch of LP sleeves on the ground.
That's awesome.
Like on the curb in New York.
That's pretty cool.
This was a common motif, so I feel like that's not Bloodlink screwing a band on the label.
It looks great.
Groundwork were Arizona kind of heavy hardcore band, hyper political. I haven't listened to this record in a long time. Probably, I remember that I still listened to it into the early thousands. So at least like 2002, I was still listening to this record. I'd listened to the CD of it. It was like a discography CD on Bloodlink. And then certainly at some point I hadn't listened to it like in ages. Maybe once or twice over the years. But yeah, King of the Monsters, which is like a label from Arizona that didn't put out Groundwork records, but was like associated with like that crew of people. And Protagonist, which is Brendan from Groundwork's label, have just reissued this. And this is one I might pick up if it's not sold out, because I've always had a soft spot for this record. But again, were you into Groundwork?
I liked it. I had probably hadn't heard it in 30 years though, because it's something I sort of just like left behind for some strange reason, along with the rest of the hardcore I sort of walked out on, I guess, in the late 90s. But um, I was pretty impressed with it. I mean, it's got a really specific guitar sound, that's for sure. And I think we were talking about how that was good because it's like, seems like they kind of worked on their guitar tone pretty nicely for this. I don't know what kind of gear they were using, but it, you know, I thought it's like heavy in a really cool way.
It's
7-inch
kind
too.
of like an original sounding band. In my
Yeah,
head, having not listened to it in a while, and the fact that now when I go back and listen to stuff from the 90s, I tend to listen to weird stuff like Marauder, stuff that I
right.
never would have listened to at the
Me too.
time, or maybe Integrity or like, I don't know, other like metal type stuff, like not metal, but metal hardcore influence stuff like All Out War or Archangel or whatever. I'm not as inclined to be like, let's go revisit Groundwork.
Right.
And it has a very unique sound because it's super kind of heavy and chugga chugga sort of riffs, but it doesn't do the what became the shorthand of like the chun 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 chun,
Yeah, the
those
Slayer
kinds of
thing.
riffs. Those aren't there. There's no Slayer riffs. It's like they were trying to like conjure the heaviest thing that they could do without going into full on metal. It's almost like Earth Crisis meets Downcast.
I was just thinking of
Um,
Downcast. Yeah, it's like I don't think the Downcast stuff holds up so much for me. Although some of it's like memorable, like Hate Comes Easy is like such a memorable song, but like it's like they took the Downcast mold and like improved upon it, like and just made it like better. It's definitely in that line of that they have the same kind of political tone too, obviously. So um
yeah,
and I bet they would probably have named Downcast as an influence because Downcast was super popular. Downcast and Struggle both,
yes.
and cast a pretty long shadow. So, um, yeah, I was just thinking Downcast, but like, it's kind of got the same kind of like heaviness of like maybe even Dead Guy or something too, but it's just coming from a different place. I think, like probably listening to
Yeah, because
different
it's not as
stuff.
chaotic.
Yeah,
It's
doesn't have the
very,
noise rock element to it
no, no,
as
no, it
much.
doesn't. It's almost like I was going to say it's very ordered,
Yeah,
maybe. I don't know, or very structured. But one of the things that strikes me, because this is, I think, one of the things that maybe as you get older, you start to notice more, or maybe I just like am more discerning. But I did immediately notice like the guitar tones are really cool. The bass sounds great. And then there's stuff that they do with just like kind of building up noise in their like compositions where you're just like, that sounds cool. And they don't do the typical like what's the pick up the string thing?
oh
You know
yeah, that
that? Like
type
the
of
very
stuff. Yeah,
typical
pick
hardcore, like
slides.
this is how we're gonna build it up with
Yeah,
the pick slide. They do things that achieve the same effect, but they don't use those particular sounds.
right.
It's a very unique record. Um, and one of the things I like about it is like even though it's like full on screaming, you can hear Brendan's voice. Like you
Right.
can tell, like, oh, that's a specific person. It's not like what ends up happening with the Screamo stuff, similar to black metal, where it's an indeterminate shriek that everyone makes roughly the same sound.
Right.
Like he has a voice and you can like really hear it in there. And this is maybe like a nice way to contrast this to Portraits of Past a little bit, where I was like, Portraits of Past singer kind of does the same type of thing at all times.
Yeah.
Um, Groundwork, Brendan feels like he's crafting parts to the songs where like the vocals work differently. And I think like they were around, I don't know how long they were around, but they had enough time to do like two 7 inches, a split 7 inch, a bunch of compilations, a demo, and tour. So they got somewhere, and they get somewhere where at the end they're, I mean, they're a very musical band. They're doing interesting stuff that is different. And I feel like this might be a record that is kind of forgotten. Um, I don't feel like I see it popping up on Instagram all the time as like, oh man, this record's awesome or whatever. I feel like this record should be bigger than it is.
Yeah. Does it have a bit of, what does it fetch on Discogs?
Let's find out. I will say, like, so it's been on, I think that might have been like, looks like it was put on Spotify like 3 years ago.
Okay.
And it's like the first song on the record has the most plays and it's like 6,000. So it's like, it's not getting a ton of love. Let's go.
It might be even more of a cult thing. And this is kind of like, if you know, you know. I'm not sure how many younger people kind of discovered Groundwork later, but who knows? They were a big deal at the time though, and I never saw them or anything. But
yeah, I mean, at this time, like having records out on Bloodlink, like was important.
Right. Yeah, Bloodlink was a big deal.
So like original pressings of this, like the high like a high amount for it is $50.
Okay.
Oh, let's see what that tour edition goes for. That's the one that have
I
behind me. Oh, these guys did a reissue in 2015 too.
Oh, really?
Of this LP. It
must be popular.
Only one has ever been sold. Yeah, and again, that was like through Protagonist, the guy from the band's label. But yeah, I don't know. It's a cool record. Like with Portraits of the Past, it's aesthetically not my thing enough that I kind of have to be patient with it and allow myself to listen to the whole record. Sure. It's kind of like if I'm listening,
kind of same.
Like it's honestly, it's like listening to Boston or something, where I'm like, I'm going to be patient. I'm going to listen to this whole thing. I don't dislike it, but I'm not going to be
pulling.
I'm not rocking this all the time.
Right. Same here.
A Groundwork record, though, I'm like, oh, this record is surprisingly good. It's an interesting take on heavy music that's like pretty distinct. And the other thing is like, then I listened to the first 7-inch that was on Bloodlink, and I was like, oh yeah, even this is unique. Like,
yeah.
And again, like that, like I remember thinking that record sounded odd enough that when it came out, I'd never heard like industrial, but there was something about it that felt not like hardcore. And it's like, sure. Even though it's like not industrial, it's got very interesting guitar sounds that are almost like metallic noises. And it's very kind of stomping. And it's just like, I don't know, it's a different animal. Mm-hmm. It's a record people should listen to, honestly.
Yeah, I agree. Revisit that one. Especially like to just get your the criticism of 90s hardcore getting too metal. I think this is like is one of those records that strikes a nice balance. It's like, oh, it's sort of like, that's how I kind of feel about early Hatebreed. I'm like, this is like real hardcore. It's not like, it's got chugs, but it's got it's got a real kind of New York hardcore attitude to it too.
Yeah, but, it's a cool record. This is a record, I mean, like another one where like the influence of that's probably what unites all of this stuff that we're talking about right now is like the influence of Abolition is so strong.
Right.
Like this could have been on Abolition. Well, again, it would be tied with Portraits of Past and Julia and Threadbare. Well, Threadbare would win, and then all the other guys I feel like would be in second place, kind of tied as like really good records. But yeah, like it's funny because like a lot of people are doing like a sort of 90s metalcore sound that is influenced by like Disembodied, earlier Converge, Earth Crisis to an extent. And like this is an interesting record because like you would not listen to this and be like, oh, this is like a metalcore record, like that early 90s version of it. But the way it gets to heaviness, it is through that just like, muted E chords, basically.
Palm mutes.
Yeah.
Drop tune, possibly. I'm sorry, I'm so distracted.
It's not noticeable except that you keep bringing it up, that's the distracted part.
Oh, sorry about that. My mind is darting everywhere.
That's Groundwork. People should listen to it.
Yeah, that's definitely a reissue worth picking up if they're still around.
And this is one where I actually want to find like a good quality live video and see what it sounds like.
Oh yeah.
I never saw them live, but like
I never did either.
If they sounded live like they do on that record,
they
must have been like crushing.
I wonder if they ever came to the East Coast, but I don't know.
They definitely did. I've seen photos of them playing in Connecticut,
Oh, okay.
but it's not the Connecticut Groundwork.
Right. There was also a
Um,
coffee shop in Hollywood called Groundwork when I moved to LA.
Oh, sorry. One thing I think is interesting, we're not going to talk about it, but you sent a link to the 400 Years Suture LP,
Oh yeah, that
which
was
is
pretty good.
I guess I never really heard that record. I owned the second one, and maybe Suture being on a Canadian label, Great American Steak Religion, just made it like slightly harder to get because all those releases could be a little bit harder to get. I had listened to the last record. I think it's called Transmit Failure or something like that. Or the second record is called Transmit Failure. And then we listened to Absinthe. And
Yeah.
Absinthe is one of the guitarists plus the singer of Groundwork, Jared being the other guitarist. And then 400 Years is Dave Jackson, the other guitarist from Groundwork. I thought it was very interesting to see what happened when they veer apart. That Absinthe is more, it's still a hardcore band, but it's more influenced by like noise rock. Like it sounds like Unsane at times. It's definitely of the same ilk as like Jesuit and like a couple other bands that like they're like metal hardcore sort of bands. Like Channel broke up and then they wanted to do something that just seemed like more intense and less like genre-ish. And then 400 Years is they are kind of like if the first Hoover song on the LP was its own genre, kind of like Sleepy Time Trio, for Mile Marker were a little bit like that, like a certain style of guitar. I think it's really interesting because it's like I feel like you take those two things and then you push those two guys in a band together and you do end up with Groundwork. And then when you separate them, they kind of go off at two different extremes. Like
Right.
one is much more noisy and dirty, and the other one is much more clean and choppy. And like just it sounds like Shotmaker is what 400 Years sounds like. Like a
yeah.
Shotmaker, but less less noise rockish, like less
Right.
Jesus Lizard in there.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I had a point. Did I make a point just then? I said something.
Yeah. Yeah. The separation of the Groundwork guys creating kind of two different strains of hardcore for that time, which is all new to me. Hearing that stuff this week. So,
the 400 Year stuff is pretty good. I don't love it.
It's okay.
But I think it's like, again, it's difficult for me to get through an entire 400 Years record. I do kind of just be like, oh, I could just listen to.
It's weird. I like
Shotmaker.
heavy guitar, but I think that's probably why I like Nirvana so much, because it's got the heavy stuff, but they have like pops. Like it's blended with stuff. Like I don't like stuff that bums me out so much these days. Even though I love that kind of music, like a lot of black metal, but I don't need the negative vibes so much, and death metal and stuff like that. I was kind of getting really deep into that shit for a minute, but
yeah, that stuff would be a bummer.
Yeah. Ever since my Morbid Angel shirt cursed me, I definitely don't want to play with those energies.
I have a little thought here, and it was related to. So I was thinking about something with these like reunion shows, like say Frail, but other ones that if you listen to normal music, like your bands tend to stay together kind of forever. And like if at one point they were funded by a major label, they had enough of an audience that like some random band from 1995 that was on a major label can sort of get back together, or they can play the state fair and make a little bit of money, or they can do like some like nostalgia tour. They like there's an audience built in that's big enough to sustain at least like a bit of activity. And then you have like boomer rock bands that basically never break up, right? Like they can despise each other and they will stick around and still do stuff. Like they might not ever make a new record, but they're like, we don't hate each other enough not to get rich touring.
Well, like the Pixies.
Yes.
You know,
and then
that seems like not a happy reunion.
Yeah, and then you take like hardcore and to a certain extent punk, but especially hardcore, we have all these bands that came out of friend groups. And if that friend group fractures, that's a huge problem. And the bands are only around for 2 years, and they're literally made of the 15 and 16-year-olds. Because we were talking about, cynically, we were like, why would anyone want to see Frail?
Right.
And then, but we also have like this weird bias against reunion shows that's rooted in being in hardcore. I think like you have, like, that's a thing. Like you develop a weird purist take on things. Like even bands will do reunion shows and be like, well, it's for a good cause. That'll be their justification. Like it's for a good cause. It's like for our friend died and we're raising money for his daughter. I feel like that's a very common kind of like hardcore reunion show background. Or even Hoover, like I remember somebody in like one of their social media bios, it was like X blah blah blah. Yeah, I think it was Joseph McRedmond. It said something like Ex Admiral, Crown Hate Ruin, and then it said Hoover, and in parentheses it said ongoing nightmare. So there's like this thing of like within like hardcore and hardcore adjacent music, there's like like a lot of people would think it would be weird if Alex Dunham formed a new band and mixed in their sets Hoover and Regulator Watt songs. And Alex wouldn't do it because as far as he's concerned, like the songs are the result of the band. And when the band is done, the songs are dead. They're gone. And like Jay Robbins talks about how he had to kind of come to grips with, I am a songwriter. It's okay to play a Jawbox song. I wrote the song. Like I can do this. I'm allowed to. But before he had like the punk rock guy thing of like, no, that's lame. And so it's just thinking about how different it is when you're into hardcore, that like it's not expected that there's going to be reunions, and that you're going to see these bands again, and that it's like okay. And it's like we kind of were dismissing it as nostalgia, which it is. But with every other genre of music that has something of the music industry related to it, it's just totally acceptable. Like it's completely acceptable for fucking Ringo Starr to be on tour right now, play some Beatles tunes. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's an interesting thing, but like hardcore and like punk have this like elitism to them that we're like very suspicious of this like behavior.
I feel like we lost it a little bit though, because I feel like we're the only two people eyeing it with suspicion. Like culturally, I feel like everybody's just like down with what Numero's doing, but I do kind of understand both sides of it better now, and I guess people are really excited to see Frail. I'm curious to see some video of that stuff. Those shows are coming up pretty soon, I think. Not my bag, that's all. It's not stuff I'm really keen to revisit, and in general, reunions are a little, I don't know. I'm probably just older now and not as like motivated to go out to see live music anyway. So like I'm not particularly keen on any reunions. But
that's true. Like the bands I want to see are not reunions. They're like Kowloon Walled City, Young Widows. I don't know. They're just bands I've been following for a bit. Like,
yeah.
Them I want to see.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah, because actually I can't be bothered. Like Quicksand played Slip here a while back. I didn't go.
Right. Yeah, I'm just. I need to be re-socialized though. So I've realized in recent years since COVID, I'm definitely in a kind of a antisocial, isolated kind of situation. So maybe.
Yeah, it'd be good to leave the house again.
Yeah.
Go see bands.
Yeah, well, if I make it back, I might go see Dan Higgs play AS220 in April. No, March. If I make it back in time, if I'm around.
I think it actually is like an interesting time because, like, even though I don't leave the house, I understand that post-COVID lockdown, like, people go to things again. Pre-lockdown, you'd go see, like, anytime I did go to a show, it felt like there was no one there. It's like I remember, like, I wonder if this is a while ago now that I think about it. I feel like Today's the Day tours kept getting canceled, so it's hard to know. But I just remember going to see Today's the Day with like Ken Mode. It just didn't seem like there was anybody there.
Really?
You know what I mean? And then now I see like photos from like from bands like that on tour where there's like people there. And it's
Yeah, I
like
think
being
people are.
completely deprived got people to leave. And like there's in Minneapolis, there's more venues than there have been in the entire time I've lived here that opened up in the last 2 or 3 years. Like it's insane how many places you can go see shows at.
No, that's cool.
Which for the longest time it was like there was like two good places and then a couple unsatisfactory places that you could, but you didn't want to go to, like whatever, the Fine Line or something. And now it's like there's all these places that existed, and then there's a bunch of new ones. But then it coincides with me like being completely socialized into not leaving the house.
Yeah, I'm totally screwed because I live in a small town, so it's I've realized how much I've isolated since COVID and all this. So
I think Providence would be a good fit. Wait, hold on. Let's wrap this up.
Oh yeah.
How do we wrap it up?
Thanks for. That's on you. I can't do it.
This has been Male Worship Radio.
Thanks for listening.
That's all we've got, guys.
Like and subscribe.